Hello everyone, this is Frederick Holmes of Frederick Holmes & Company, Gallery of Modern and Contemporary Art, located in Pioneer Square, Seattle, Washington. This is going to be a tour of this month's very special exhibition in celebration of the gallery's 10th anniversary here in Seattle. This is a solo show of Marybeth Rothman's work. Marybeth is a New Jersey-based, very highly acclaimed artist, known predominantly in the Northeast. The gallery is her West Coast representative, and I'm very, very proud to bring this solo show of her work to Seattle. When I say critically acclaimed, it's not just hyperbole. Last year, one of Marybeth's portraits was chosen as a semi-finalist for the Smithsonian Museum's portrait competition, and it hung at the Smithsonian Museum for several months in 2022. Next month in July, a couple of her portraits are going to be incorporated into a very important group exhibition entitled Modigliani and the Modern Portrait at the Nassau County Museum on Long Island. So if you live in the vicinity of Long Island or New York or New Jersey, you might want to make a day trip of it and catch that show, because it's going to be an important show where Modigliani's portraits will be in dialogue with other great masters of the 20th century, including Picasso, David Hockney, Thomas Hart Benton, and multiple other historic figures, along with a handful of contemporary artists, including Eric Fischl and Marybeth Rothman. So let's get to it. This whole series that we see on this wall is a special series that's being premiered here at the gallery during June for the show. They were created specifically for this show. These are all images from a community that she calls the string section of the Mill Creek Community Orchestra. And this is Sabine Bouchard. Sabine is the maestro of the string community orchestra, string section of the community orchestra. And in fact, this portrait here that was given to the character of Sabine is actually going to be one of the images that is included in the Nassau County Museum show, along with the Modiglianis and a variety of other artists, the selection of other artists. So what we see, of course, in Sabine Bouchard, as we see in many other of her work, are probably about 20 different layers of digital imagery that she's incorporated into the work to create this reimagined and fictional biography of this figure. A lovely overcoat that's comprised of these patterns of leaf patterns and circles and florals and so forth. And again, we see here in the background this landscape, which is an entirely different photograph. Moving over here, continuing the theme of the string section of the Mill Creek Community Orchestra are the Falcone twins. They play the second violin and the principal viola. I love what Marybeth has done here by duplicating the image and creating this kind of wonderful swishing effect here to the right of their skirts. But if you look closely at their stockings, there's this kind of writing in print and this kind of harlequin pattern that we see, as well as the ground that they're standing on has this beautiful kind of scroll pattern. And of course, they're leaning on some type of a counter or a rail or something that, again, is a different layer. And we see this kind of pottery or a vase or something over here on the far right. So the way she creates and enhances these biographical reimaginings of the characters, it's not just designed to be something that is entirely realistic, obviously. There's an element of even surrealism to her work. But I really consider her work largely to be conceptual, because, again, multiple layers of digital imagery of all kinds, and then, of course, they are all finished with pigmented beeswax, or encaustic, of course, as it's often called. Here we see Lela Mae Marshall. Lela Mae is the concert master. And I love what she's done here by placing this woman on horseback, a beautiful face, look at this, with the sombrero. And the horse has these kind of beautiful flowers throughout, Maybe these are carnations. I'm not really a florist, so I couldn't tell you for sure. But look at the landscape that she's standing in the foreground of. And it's interesting, kind of almost, again, surreal landscape with these two isolated figures here walking away or standing away from each other back to back. It just lends this element of mystery to the overall composition. Is this Mill Creek? Are these, obviously she's the concertmaster because that's the title she's been given, but who are these people in the background, right? We want to know. This is one of my favorites. This is Akiko. Akiko plays the double bass. And I love that this composition of the Asian woman in vintage dress in a rowboat playing a ukulele. Now, this is a good example also of how Marybeth uses her skill and imagination to bring something to the composition that did not hitherto exist. And what I mean by that is that whereas she loved the overall image of the woman in the rowboat, the head of the woman didn't initially work for Marybeth. So she took a head from a different image and incorporated it onto the body of the woman in the rowboat, and giving the woman a hair comprised of, again, flowers with patterns throughout. We see this kind of scrolling pattern down here in the rowboat, which is actually vintage wallpaper that she found and photographed. The colors are just lovely. The image is never overwhelmed by color. It's really not about the color per se, even though she's using this encaustic material on the surface. It's really about kind of the conceptual element of the composition and what she's doing by placing these figures in these communities, these kind of, again, groupings or milieus that, create a sense of, again, kind of ambiguous mystery. We want to know what this is all about. Now here, this is James Jimmy Hillgardner, excuse me, James Jimmy Hillgardner. Jimmy's has a more stoic, stern expression, and he's sitting on his horse, which has these patterns of and words incorporated into him, into the horse's body. We just barely read that. In this case, the landscape that Mr. Hillgardner is in the foreground of is more barren. There's one bush right over here, but outside of that, Mr. Hillgardner is pretty much riding by himself. But look at the shirt that she's put on him. This is she took some type of a pattern from something else and incorporated that into the pattern of her shirt. And then, of course, the background, the field, is just paint and mark making. Here's a couple of cool cats. This is Charlotte, Emmanuel, and Judith, all the violin players. I love what she's done here with this trio. They're all just happy, smiling people. Check out those glasses. See how she's, again, used the patterns from different materials. Right over here, right behind this figure, we see actually another face. It appears to be another face, anyway. Now, I'm very fortunate. We're going to move away now from this collection. That concludes the collection of the string section of the Mill Creek Community Orchestra. And take a look at this beauty. I was very fortunate to have secured this from Miss Rothman's studio. This is The Last Mermaid. This is an older work from a few years back. Not that old, but just a few years back. But I love what she's done here. Just the femininity, the beauty of the figure, the woman's expression of just pure serenity, her hair graced with a crown of flowers. her feet just barely delicately touching the surface of the water. The pattern on her calf there. In today's world, that would probably be a tattoo, but this is not in today's world. This is not in any world that we know of, in fact. A little bit of print down there just to add to the ambiguity of the composition. Now moving over here, we're going to take on an entirely different series. This is a series of archival digital prints that Marybeth created. This is from a series that she did called Fellow Travelers. Now these are archival pigment prints created in an edition of only 3, each of them of course hand-signed by the artist. This is called Harmony and Grace. Aren't they beautiful? Here are a few more from the Fellow Travelers series. This is called The Choreographer, the Poet, and Their Family. And I love what she does, you know, in that she takes these people, in this case, this family, a family portrait of Asian, probably immigrants from long, long ago, and reimagines them, giving them these titles of the artist and a poet and a choreographer, and really kind of ennobling them in many respects. Look at the patterns that we see here in the background and the words. We see this right in there. And I'd like you to take a close look at this face right in here of the young woman with the kind of the sailor's collar, because that becomes the inspiration for another series that we'll get to in just a second. Concluding the Fellow Travelers series is this one called the Ipswich League of Women Voters. The Ipswich League of Women Voters. Again, these are all archival digital prints, archival pigment prints, published in an edition of only 3. This is the, I love these. This is Mimi Longford from the Longford Sisters. The Longford Sisters, again, are completely fictional or reimagined sisters that she gave this narrative to, creating this, she called the Longford Lighthouse, that the sisters have been maintaining for 5 generations, she says. And look at what she's done here. The woman is beautiful with these kind of soft ruby red lips. The hair peeking out from her crown is actually a pattern from antique wallpaper that's been digitally reconfigured. You see some mark making and paint down here. But the crown, or the headdress, if you will, the hat that she's wearing that's filled with flowers, overflowing with these flowers, is actually 2 industrial cogs that were given to her by her father-in-law that she just thought were so cool, and she photographed them and turned them into this headdress or crown, if you will. Here we have Bobby. Bobby is from a series that she did called Poets Encampment. These are all 18 by 18. Poets Encampment, Bobby from Poets Encampment. Look at that face. Wouldn't you just fall in love with that face? The pattern that we see here again in the background. I don't know where she finds these things, but she is just an amazing resource. Now here, if you remember again that image of the young Asian woman, these are 2 of the 3 images that I curated from a series that she did called We All Belong Here. And they're each a variation on the same image, of course, and that was that young Asian woman that we saw in the Fellow Travelers of the Asian family. Only now she's again kind of reimagined her into an entirely different composition with these beautiful hat made of flowers, a headband, and retaining that kind of the military or naval collar that she's wearing with some flowers down here in the background. And then the other one, this is Lysianthus. I'm sorry, I didn't get the titles of these. This is Paeonia, and this is Lysianthus. And again, the same composition basically, but a variation, where now she has this scarf wrapped around her head and these gorgeous flowers that comprise her headdress, her hat, and some mark making down here. Now, this is actually a variation of this composition. This woman was actually the semi-finalist in the Smithsonian Museum's portrait competition. So this is a variation of this in a much larger scale version of this was featured in the museum. It featured at the museum in the last several months of 2022. And it's also, if you are passing through Newark International Airport, you'll see a large 6-foot reproduction of this same image when you come through the airport. These are two more pieces from the Poets Encampment series. Here we have Ruby's Daughter. And Ava and Tulip. Aren't they lovely? I love the way I love her selection process. I mean, the photos that she uses, she doesn't just use any vintage photograph. The photograph has to really speak to her. And as she's creating the work, layering imagery upon imagery and ephemera and bits of details and this and that, the figures kind of take on their own life and become part of the larger narrative. That's really where the biographies of the characters really come from. They just kind of slowly evolve as she's working on them. This is Bunty Longford from the Longford sisters also, kind of the same image, by the way, the same woman I mean, but the image reversed. And this was inspired actually in photograph from a steampunk event that she went to in New Jersey with her son. She's not a steampunk follower, but she was fascinated with this kind of subculture and the costumes that they were wearing, and so she got permission to photograph several of them. This piece was actually sold at the opening of the show. Now, moving along to some older works, this is from a series that she did that she introduced a few years back called the Understudies. And these are actually, again, archival pigment prints that are mounted on against non-glare glass. They're much larger. These are 40 by 40. This is a piece called Claudette Waiting. It's beautiful. Look at the colors. Beautiful hues of pink and rose. We see the writing in here. Claudette Waiting. This is from a series that I was first introduced to when I first began working with Marybeth Rothman. This is a series that she did called Biographical Annotations, and this is a particular work called Camille, 7:17 p.m. Camille, 7:17 p.m. And biographical annotations are really invite the viewer to contemplate for a moment this very specific moment in time, this very specific minute, 7:17 p.m., frozen in time. And what was Camille thinking? What was Camille experiencing? Where was she? What were her thoughts? What were her feelings, her emotions? And a lot of that is enhanced by a lot of the writing and the other digital imagery that's incorporated into the work. Nothing that's ever explicit. That's not the way Marybeth works, but things that just kind of suggest and add to or enhance the ambiguity. This is another work from the Understudies series. This is called The Magician's Assistant. Look at this beautiful hues of blue. Sorry about the glare, but of course this is glass. Non-glare glass, but still you get a little bit of that. Look at the chairs. I love this. This to me has always had a little bit of a kind of a surrealist element, almost like Magritte. And her hair, her crown, looks like the dome of a building somewhere, or a helmet or something. This is a series also from Biographical Annotations. This is a diptych. They can be purchased as a diptych or separately. This is called 80 Pearl Street, 9:07 p.m. And these were photographs probably from about the late 1930s, early 40s. And one can easily imagine that these were probably photos taken in a photo booth. These two gentlemen probably, possibly anyway, being two closeted gay men who found a moment of intimacy behind the curtain of a photo booth. And I love in particular this one where you just see this very tender expression being exchanged between them. And finally, this is a work called Amelia, and although I returned a lot of the work that I had in exchange for this new show from Marybeth, I kept this one because this was really one of the first paintings that was introduced through the gallery of Marybeth Rothman's work when I did the first show back in 2014, and I've only occasionally brought this out, but I really, really love this one. It's called Amelia. She's called Amelia, and we see this beautiful kind of color of, I guess, what are possibly rhododendrons and writing and print. We see down here Syracuse, NY, October 17. You know, and these are all little hints, again, very ambiguous hints that comprise our reimagining of, or at least suggest a reimagining of Amelia. Who was Amelia? What was she thinking? What was this? Look at her expression. I mean, this was probably at one point maybe a passport photo or some type of a photo ID or something along those lines, but Marybeth has turned it into a work of art. Just absolutely gorgeous. I love this. Marybeth Rothman, Amelia. So that concludes basically the show. I thank you very much for joining us. This has been an honor to present this exhibition here in Seattle. Again, Marybeth Rothman, Recent Observations and Conjectures near MADAKET Road. And the national premiere in Seattle through the gallery of this very important grouping called the string section of the Mill Creek Community Orchestra. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope if you get a chance, if you're in Seattle, come visit us real soon. The show will be on through July 4th, and if you're in the Northeast, you can check out her contribution to the group exhibition at the Nassau County Museum, Modigliani and the Modern Portrait. And you can also, of course, not only continue to enjoy this video, but if you go to the gallery's website, frederickholmesandcompany.com, under exhibitions, recent exhibitions, you'll see this show in its entirety. Thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to presenting to you new work again real soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.